When the government came to power, it made a promise of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, which itself showed that there's something missing in the Indian growth story. And this held true also for the Congress government when Prime Minister Manmohan Singh had given the call for an inclusive growth. So growth that has happened in the Indian economy in the last couple of decades has essentially been extremely exclusivist, and hence you had this slogan being given by the BJP when they came to power in 2014. But if you look at the data of what has happened to the Indian economy, it is not something which you find very convincing. The slides have already moved, but let me briefly tell you about that. If you look at the growth rate has not been anything even closer to what happened with the UPA 1 and 2. There has been some debate around the methodology of the GDP measurement itself. But given the fact that the government itself has come up with two different estimates, one trumping the other, just to show that the Modi government has performed better, itself does not give credence to this whole change in methodology that you have. So we have just stuck to the original two series, and in that you find that the growth rate has been low. If you look at the banking sector in particular, because that was something which they were claiming they have delivered on, if you look at the three regimes, which is UPA 1, UPA 2, and the Modi government, you can see that the NPA as a proportion of gross loans has really shot through the roof during the Modi government. And the same holds true about banking profitability. It has turned negative in the last, in 2018-19, and it has been one of the lowest since 2000. Now, the other aspect of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas was that whether this growth itself, whatever growth happened, was that inclusive enough? And what we find, unfortunately, again, there is a data problem that has been there with this government pretty much everywhere. This holds true also about the data on inequality, and hence we had to, make do with some arrangement, which is essentially the tax data that you have. And you can see here that there has been a rise in the share of the richest 10%. This is only for those 4 years. And at the same time, the bottom 50% has actually lost out in terms of their share. This is just those who have paid taxes. So you can imagine what would have happened to those people who are outside this tax net. If you look at agriculture in particular, something that is directly to do with the rural distress that we keep hearing about, and if you look at three components briefly, one is the growth rate of credit, which is the blue line that you see there. It has gone down, the growth rate of credit to agriculture and allied activities. If you look at the output prices, when they say low inflation, it essentially also means that the income of the farmers who get the other side of the coin are also losing out, which is what you find in that green, which is pretty much flat, stagnant around a zero rate, which means they have not. So far from doubling their income by 2022, they have not even increased the incomes. If you look at the workers, the agricultural workers, the orange line that you see there, for a very brief period, it went beyond 0%, but it has gone back to, so it has been pretty much flat as well. So the growth that has taken place has essentially accumulated at the top and not to the people in general. Then there has been a discussion around the demographic dividend that India has, which essentially is that we have a lot of young people, and if they become part of this growth story, then you have a different kind of a country altogether. But if you look at, and this is something very interesting, this data was not released by the government at all. And this was released, as you know very well, in the Business Standard through a leak. Just imagine a government which is promising jobs, does not want to release data, and the data gets leaked through the press, and the press shows that during the post-demonetization phase, obviously the unemployment rate goes up. But even if you compare it for a longer period of time, as Somesh had pointed, that it is at a 45-year high, the unemployment rate in India. And this is for different categories. You can see education itself is not providing you with any cushion, because the unemployment rates within the educated, whether urban or rural, male or female, has actually been quite high during this government. Now, not only have they not delivered what they did, and in this particular case is what we call two Modi-made disasters. One we call, it's not demonetization, it's the demon of demonetization, and the GST, both of which what they have done for the economy, as you know, but just to reiterate, there has been a decline in the growth of the GDP, but that itself is not enough. What has happened also is because of this, people have withdrawn from the labor force, which is what you see on the right side, which is the labor force participation ratio. One slogan which was very popular, which he said, "Na khaunga, na khane dunga," for those, I mean, not only will I not let corruption happen, but for me, but I'll also not let others eat. Look at what has happened to party donations, which we would say is khaunga, and that khaunga has, between the three parties, I mean, let's say the Congress, the others, and BJP, just look at the amount of donations which have been made. And by the way, now you have the electoral bonds. You cannot even find out who has paid this money to them. And if they are paying in such large amounts, there is definitely a quid pro quo, which you will see at the end of this presentation, which Deepa will end with. And if you look at, so this is for those 4 years that we have the data for. One which we wanted to specifically mention is Na Khane Dunga ka response, which is that bank frauds have really gone up during these 4 years. And in the last half-year data that has released, it has already crossed the current figures that you have. So just imagine half more year of Modi, what it would result in when the data is finally released. The average frauds that are now taking place are close to 5.56 crores. And the amount that you see on the left axis is in billion rupees in total. Now, having said all of this, the basic point that we are making is anyway the government or economics per se should not be obsessed with growth. But even if they were, they have not delivered on it. There is something much more beyond growth, and for that, for this audience, and particularly with Professor Sen sitting amongst us, there is no need to elaborate further, but development indicators are not only more important than growth, but they are the indicators which tell you whether the growth has actually been inclusive in the real sense, and that would be taken up by Deepa.
Thank you. Like Rohit said, if you look at the book, we have 3 sections in it. The first was the economy, which is broadly what he presented. The second section, we talk about the social sector. And we are once again try and look at each of these sectors in terms of the promises that were made in the campaign leading up to the election in 2014. So the main slogan in relation to the social sector and delivery of public schemes was minimum government and maximum governance. So on minimum government, yes, that's something we do see. If you, the health and ICDS budgets have already gone. There was some movement in the previous 10 years with the Right to Education Act, the National Rural Health Mission, universalization of ICDS, where we saw budgets for these kind of programs increasing. But you find that the rate at which they've been increasing in this 5-year period has been much lower, and in fact in real terms the budgets for education and health have actually gone down. What we do see, however, is that the maximum governance, the way the NDA has interpreted it, has happened in full force. And there they seem to have taken the aspects of the previous government, which was really not what was positive for the social sector. So while the rights-based legislations have been neglected, the process of privatization, which was set in from the UPA2 itself, is something that has happened much faster. So one example of figures we have here is to do with higher education, where you see in the small period where not only have the average enrollments per college gone down, but in fact for the first time you see that the enrollments in state private universities is even higher than central university enrollment now. And this is something we also would see, for instance, in health, where now the emphasis is entirely on an insurance program. So in every aspect of the social sector, you see that the delivery is now being shifted on to the private sector. The other aspect in maximum governance, where the focus seems to have been, is completely on the whole issue of digitization, as if digitization is the solution for governance issues, which has caused a lot of havoc. I just want to give two examples. One is to do with Aadhaar, which all of us are familiar with. Apart from all the issues related to privacy and surveillance that Aadhaar comes with, the experience of Aadhaar being made mandatory in various social sector schemes, including old age pensions, Narega, has been seen to be completely disrupting these schemes and actually reducing people's access. The other is to, again, digitization, making plans for which India is definitely not ready. For example, Operation Digital Blackboard for primary schools, in a situation where most teachers' positions are vacant, where schools do not even have a budget line for electricity bills, forget having computers and having digital education. So what is the other aspect of the social sector is this whole thing of the new schemes. There have been so many new schemes with new acronyms, but when you look at the new schemes, again, you see two kinds of things. One is they are basically schemes which always existed, which now have fancier names. And the other is that they have still, even if they did something new, it did not achieve what they aimed to achieve or what they claimed they would achieve. So if you look at electrification, which keeps coming in the newspapers every day as a big achievement, you find that the average number of villages electrified was actually greater during the term of the previous government. If you look at the Ujjwala Yojana, again one of the flagship programs of this government, while it is true that the LPG connections have increased, we find if you look at data of refilling of cylinders, that given the high increasing prices of LPG and the problems in access to cylinders, actually the LPG consumption in terms of refilling, the growth has in fact gone down. Jan Dhan Yojana, again a flagship program, where once again you find that although the number of bank accounts did increase, and that is positive, that does not automatically mean financial inclusion. There was a hike in the deposits post demonetization, but then it goes down quite quickly after. And we know again from whatever data is available that the average deposits in the Jan Dhan accounts are really low, and in fact they've stopped putting out the data once again on this. The Mudra scheme, which is supposed to give loans for small and medium industries. Again, if you look at the overall loan outgo, you find that the loans that have been given post Mudra for micro, small and medium industries have actually gone down post the Mudra scheme. And even if you look at the average size of one Mudra loan, more than 90% of the loans are around 20,000 rupees. So leave alone, that is not enough for a single person to set up even the pakoda stall, leave alone employing another person on it, because that is where one claims employment will be created. And a point that I want to make once again, which Rohit said, is that we are unable to look at the outcome data in health and education, because like in every other sector to do with the economy, even in the social sector, the data has been very non-transparent under this government, so there's very little available. But one final point that we would like to make, which kind of struck us also when we read all the chapters in this book together, to which so many contributed, is that you do see a change in the nature of the state, not just towards moving away from provision towards privatization, which is something that began in the previous government as well, but also where the state seems to be the spokesperson for big capital. So you have Modi appearing in the advertisements for Jio, for Paytm, or the Geo Institute getting the tag of eminence, Modi going and feeding children in an Akshay Patra midday meal, or in terms of health insurance schemes or farmers insurance schemes, where in the Fasal Bima Yojana we have data where the companies have made more money than the money that's been paid out to farmers as insurance. And finally, the biggest program, the Ayushman Bharat in health, where already the way the corporate hospitals and the health insurance companies have welcomed us tells us who is really going to benefit from these schemes. So this is something that we see as an overall trend, which is a shift from a situation where we were having rights-based legislations and some focus coming onto the social sector, not enough, but now moving away from that. So this is just a glimpse of what we have in the book. There's more. We have a chapter on foreign policy, on politics, which we've not been able to include in this presentation. So we hope you will go out and buy a copy of the book and also write about what we've written about there. Thank you.